There is a cruel paradox in human psychology. Those who appear the most powerful are often the ones who tremble before the quietest souls. They wear the mask of confidence, walking through crowds as if they hold the fate of others in their hands. Yet behind that pride lies an abyss of insecurity, a refuge for their most primal fear. The fear of being seen, the fear of being forgotten, the fear that no one will reflect back the image they so desperately need to believe is real. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The narcissist lives under the control of the very unconscious they deny, a shadow filled with shame, wounds, and a deep sense of worthlessness. They build around themselves a fortress made of praise, admiration, and the fear of others. They need people to exist, need others' light to maintain the illusion that they themselves are shining. But there is one kind of soul that cracks their entire structure, the super empath. The super empath doesn't just feel, they see. Not only with the heart, but with the deep awareness of the soul. Their gaze pierces through every mask, reaching the part the narcissist has hidden all their life, the wounded, abandoned child who never learned what true love was. And that is why the narcissist fears them. They fear a light that cannot be manipulated, a silence that cannot be invaded, a kindness that cannot be exploited. They fear being seen by you, because the moment you recognize that their entire game is an illusion, you destroy the only power they ever had control. They fear your silence, because in it they are no longer the center. They fear your indifference, because it makes them disappear from reality. And they fear your inner strength, something they will never possess. Because the super empath does not need admiration, domination, or victory. Their strength comes from awareness, from the ability to see clearly yet remain compassionate, from walking through darkness without being consumed by it. This is not just a story about narcissists. It is the story of the awakening of the super empath, the one who was once drained, manipulated, and lost in someone else's maze, but who has now reclaimed their own light. Today, we will dive deep into the anatomy of fear, to understand why those who seem most powerful tremble before those who seem most gentle, and to realize that you, the super empath, are the mirror in which their darkness collapses. 1. Part 1. The Architecture of Fear. Fear is not born in darkness. It is born when a person tries to run away from darkness. And that is exactly what the narcissist has done all their life. They do not truly live. They merely exist in a theater where every mirror reflects back the image they want to believe is real. Strip away the polish, the boasts, the exaggerated confidence, and you will see a trembling soul inside an emptiness they themselves cannot name. Carl Jung called this the inflation of the persona, when the ego swells so large that it eclipses the true soul. For the narcissist, identity is not a product of growth, but of fear. From childhood, they learned a bitter lesson, that their worth depends on how they are perceived. Perhaps they were once children harshly judged by parents, loved only when they achieved something or endlessly compared to others. To survive, they created a better version of themselves, the child who pleases, who hides emotion, who becomes perfect so as not to be abandoned. As they grew, that mask became their face, and they forgot what their real one looked like. Thus arose their first fear, the fear of not being validated. To them, every relationship is not a connection, but an energy exchange. They give charm, wit, and talent, and in return, they take attention, admiration, and obedience. That is the fuel of the ego. They need it like lungs need air, because without an audience they collapse. Yet here lies the tragedy that fuel is never enough. There is no drug potent enough to satisfy the addiction to validation. The more they are praised, the more they fear losing it. The more they are loved, the more they fear being abandoned. Their world is not one of peace, but of an endless chase to keep the gaze of others upon them. Jung once said, "The greater the identification with the ideal image, the blacker the shadow." The narcissist lives through an idealized image of themselves, so their shadow, the buried truth, grows ever darker. And every time they meet an empath, especially a super empath, they encounter a mirror they cannot endure. Because the super empath reflects not only light, but shadow. They are not dazzled by glamour, they see through it. They sense instability in energy, the subtlest tremor in emotion, the silent spaces that others overlook. They hear the soul's quiet cry behind eloquent words, and that terrifies the narcissist more than anything. To them, being seen is not being understood, it is being exposed. When you see them, you see what they hide: smallness, insecurity, dependence, loneliness. When a super empath is present, their facade fractures like light striking cracked glass. Everything within them begins to tremble. That is why they must control you. They attack your compassion, provoke pity, stage emotional dramas, just to make you react, because only when you react do they feel real. But when you remain still, calm, and silent, the entire architecture of their power begins to shake. This is why the silence of a super empath is the thing they fear most. It forces them to face themselves. It compels them to hear the hollow echo in their soul, the one they've run from all their life. A narcissist is not afraid of you leaving. They are afraid of you leaving in peace, because that proves you were never under their control. It dissolves the illusion of power they built. A narcissist can survive being hated but not being ignored. Hatred still carries energy, still maintains a thread of connection. Indifference cuts every wire. For them, that is psychological death. When a super empath understands this, the game ends not in victory, but in transcendence. For the super empath does not seek revenge. They awaken. They do not smear or prove, they simply withdraw their energy. And when they do, the narcissist's shadow begins to devour them from within. Few realize this. Behind a narcissist's arrogance lies a terror of losing identity. They have no authentic self to return to. Take away their roles, and only emptiness remains. That is why every time they are ignored, they feel as though they are dying, as if standing before a mirror that no longer reflects them. To them, other people's attention is proof of existence. Losing it means vanishing, but they cannot admit that. Instead of facing their inner void, they turn outward, building new masks, finding new prey. They construct relationships like castles in the sand, beautiful but foundationless. They constantly change people, settings, and roles, all to avoid sitting still with themselves. That is their survival mechanism, running from silence. Yet the super empath is the embodiment of silence. They do not need to shout to be heard. They radiate stillness, and in that stillness, the narcissist sees their own emptiness reflected back, bottomless. Thus, in the architecture of fear, the super empath is the element that collapses the structure. Any system built on illusion crumbles when faced with truth. The narcissist's fear is not that you are stronger, it is that you are real. They can manipulate those still searching for love, but not those who have found love within themselves. The super empath does not need validation to know their worth. They do not need others to feel complete. And that wholeness makes them the greatest threat to hollow souls. Because nothing terrifies those who crave power more than meeting someone who does not need it. Nothing frightens those who live in illusion more than someone who lives in truth. Nothing unsettles an actor more than being seen by one who perceives the stage itself. So they will try every tactic to break you, to make you doubt yourself, react, lose balance. They will test your kindness, weaponize guilt, bait you with love. But once you understand their mechanism, you are no longer caught in it. You realize their fear was never about you. It is the product of their separation from their own soul. And when you hold the light of awareness, you transcend not only them, but the weaker part of yourself that once needed proof, recognition, and validation. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." The super empath is the one who dares to look within. And in doing so, they not only understand the narcissist, they understand the nature of fear itself. That fear never comes from the outer world, but from the distance between the ego and the truth. The narcissist fears the super empath because the super empath does not live in that distance. They live in truth, even when truth hurts. And that is what makes them free. The narcissist world is built on illusion. The super empath's world is built on awareness. One collapses when seen, the other grows stronger each time they look inward. And when truth meets illusion, there is only one outcome: illusion dissolves. That is the architecture of fear, where every brick is built from lies, held together by attention, and crumbles when touched by the light of awareness. The super empath does not need to defeat them. They only need to see them. And in that very moment, the darkness begins to fade. Part 2. The super empath as the shadow mirror. None of us enters life without carrying a shadow, but only a few have the courage to face it, and the super empath is one of them. They were not born from light, but forged in darkness where wounds became language, and empathy was born not from peace, but from pain. If the narcissist is the product of separation, the super empath is the result of integration, the fusion of light and shadow, of understanding and compassion. That is why they do not merely feel others, they know. They know in a way that logic cannot explain, reading energy, hearing what hides behind words, seeing what hides behind eyes. They see the fractures in another's soul, not to judge, but to understand. That is why they attract narcissists, and also why narcissists fear them. The super empath is the mirror that darkness dreads to face. They reflect not only what people want to see, but what they most wish to deny. When a narcissist stands before a super empath, they do not see the other, they see themselves. They see their own wounds, their own shame, their own weakness, and that terrifies them. For the empath's gaze is like light shining into the deepest layers of the unconscious, where every pretense dissolves. But the super empath does not reflect with judgment, they reflect with truth. And truth, to those unprepared, is the most terrifying thing of all. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The super empath lives by this principle. They do not try to banish the dark, they bring it into awareness. They are unafraid of heavy emotions. They allow them to flow through and reveal their message. In them, compassion is not weakness, but a refined power, the ability to stand between two opposites without being consumed: love and fear, forgiveness and boundary, light and darkness. It is this wholeness that the narcissist cannot bear. For they live fragmented, divided, masked, disconnected. When the super empath enters, their wholeness becomes a silent reminder of what the narcissist has lost. It awakens the memory of a true self long denied, and that is what they fear most, to feel. In the narcissist world, emotion is a threat, not a bridge. They fear pain, because pain once destroyed their inner child. They fear truth, because truth collapses illusion. They fear genuine love, because love requires removing the mask. And so, they fear the super empath, the one who can love them without being controlled, see through them without hating them. The super empath's love is a double-sided mirror. One side reflects the beauty of what a person could become. The other reflects the parts they've disowned. When the narcissist looks into it, they don't know what to do with the image. Their first instinct is to shatter the mirror, to attack, devalue, smear, and deny. But no blow can break a mirror made of awareness. That mirror is not an external object. It lives within the super empath's inner light. The super empath does not fight with force, they fight with presence. When they stand in the storm of manipulation, they do not strive to win. They simply remain with the truth. They need not raise their voice, because their silence alone exposes falsehood. Their stillness becomes a weapon without striking a blow. When the super empath does not react, the narcissist loses orientation. They no longer know who they are, because the power game exists only when someone plays along. A person unmoved by their emotional script causes their entire identity to collapse from within. But reaching that point requires a long journey, the journey through one's own darkness. No one can see another's shadow without first facing their own. Before becoming a mirror, The super empath was once the one reflected, manipulated, gaslit, made to doubt their worth, confused between love and pain. Yet instead of turning bitter, they learned to look deeper. They stopped asking, why did they do this? And began asking, what part of me allowed it? That question transformed pain into awareness. They no longer saw themselves as victims, but as students of human energy. And when they understood that every encounter is a mirror, they no longer hated the narcissist. They realized that person merely reflected their own shadow, the part that once wanted to be loved so much that it lost itself, that once believed sacrifice would make others change, that once feared loneliness so deeply it accepted less than it deserved. When those parts are seen, they dissolve. From those ashes, the super empath is born no longer the savior, but the witness. This is the deepest transformation, from the one who carries the world's pain to the one who reflects the world's truth. The super empath understands that no one can be saved unless they are willing to see themselves. So they stop trying to change the narcissist. They understand that everyone has their own timing for meeting their shadow. They choose silence not out of hatred, but out of respect for a spiritual law. No one has the right to steal another's awakening. In the depth of Jungian psychology, this is the maturity of the self, when the individual no longer identifies with either the persona or the shadow, but becomes the observer of both. The super empath embodies this state. They are not defined by light or dark. They are the balance between them. They can see what is ugly without becoming poisoned, and see what is beautiful without becoming enchanted. They do not need to prove they are right, for truth needs no defense, and that is what makes them untouchable. In the chaotic world of the narcissist, where everything revolves around control and image, the super empath is a living paradox. They control no one, yet their influence runs deep. They do not seek attention, yet others cannot look away. They do not chase power, yet power radiates from them because they are no longer ruled by fear. Jung said, every soul must face its shadow to become whole. The super empath does not avoid this. They walk through it, and because they have walked through their own darkness, they no longer fear anyone else's. This is the deepest reason the narcissist fears them, because they cannot make the super empath shrink. They cannot use guilt, shame, or fear to manipulate them. All tools of control fail before someone who has befriended their own darkness. The super empath is not merely the narcissist's psychological counterpart. They are the soul's evolutionary mirror. In them, empathy is no longer reaction, but awareness. They do not just feel another's pain. They see its source, the loop that keeps it alive. Thus, they do not hate, they simply observe. Because real love is not rescue, it is understanding. In the end, the super empath realizes they were never sent to fight the narcissist, but to reflect them not with anger, but with awakening. By standing firm in their own light, they cause the surrounding darkness to reveal itself. They don't need to expose anyone. Light does that naturally. This is the essence of the shadow mirror, where light does not attack darkness, but simply exists so that darkness has nowhere left to hide. When the super empath understands this, they no longer seek to win, they seek to know, and in knowing, they become free, because there is no power greater than the power of awareness. In a world obsessed with image, the super empath is the reminder that truth needs no display. True light does not need to shine brightly, it only needs to shine clearly enough to guide the way. And sometimes it is those who were once seen as the weakest who carry within them a strength so profound that even darkness trembles before it. 3. Part 3. Fear Hasson. The empath's silence. There is no sound that panics a narcissist more than the super empath's silence. In their world, silence is not peace, it is a sentence. Every manipulation game, every control strategy, every script they stage relies on one thing: your reaction. As long as you're angry, they still exist. When you cry, they feel powerful. When you argue, they feel valuable. But when you go silent, no resentment, no pleading, no explanation, they don't just lose power, they lose themselves. To a narcissist, life is a stage, and they are the star. They need an audience to perform. Every relationship is not a connection, but a mirror that reflects the inflated self. When you step off the stage, the curtain falls, the lights go out, and they are forced to stand in darkness with no one watching. That is the moment they touch what they fear most, the meaninglessness of their own being. The super empath understands this, but they do not go silent to punish. They go silent to heal. They once tried speaking, explaining, rescuing, loving. They wandered the maze of logic, tried to wake up the narcissist with kindness, only to realize you cannot wake someone who is pretending to sleep. Silence, therefore, is not surrender, it is the ultimate act of awareness. It is how the super empath recalls their energy, ends the game, and restores sovereignty to the soul. In Jungian depth psychology, this is the stage of withdrawal of projections, the retrieval of energy once cast outward. While the super empath is still reacting, they are still supplying energy, attention, fear, anger. When they become silent, they pull all of that back to center. And that seemingly passive act is in fact a fatal blow to the narcissist. Silence is a mirror. In it, nothing remains but themselves. With every minute of your indifference, they're forced to face what they've disowned: loneliness, emptiness, dependency. They begin to ask, why aren't they reacting? Why don't they need me? And in those questions, panic rises. For them, loss of control equals loss of existence. The super empath has nothing to prove. They know reaction is fuel. They recognize the narcissist's rage as the cry of an inner child unseen, clinging to control to feel real. But the super empath's compassion is no longer blind. They care, but they do not rescue. They understand, but they do not collude. Their silence becomes the border between mercy and self-destruction. Carl Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." When the super empath is silent, they do not only force the narcissist to meet their pain, they also sit with the part of themselves that once feared loneliness and being misunderstood. This time they stay. In the stillness, they discover there is nothing to fear. Loneliness ceases to be punishment, it becomes a homecoming. Silence is the sanctuary where the super empath is reborn. In the space beyond argument and the screaming of emotions, they hear the voice of their own soul, a voice once drowned by someone else's pain. They realize peace doesn't come from others changing, but from no longer being controlled by them. Feelings are no longer hijacked, energy no longer drained. In that quiet, the veil lifts and everything becomes clear. For the narcissist, the super empath's silence is a paradox. They cannot fathom how you live without reacting. They are accustomed to agitated spirits, emotional games, pulling others down to feel tall. Your quiet leaves them lost, a predator without prey. They scramble to restart the game. A contrite text, a chance call, a half-true apology, a vague post on social media. They cast emotional bait and wait. But the super empath is no longer the same. They know words are mirages and choose to trust energy, not language. A narcissist's energy never lies. It tastes rushed, restless, impatient. It does not come from love, but from the fear of losing power. And the super empath, trained by pain, senses it instantly. They no longer react, explain, or strive to prove they are the good one. They understand that no one can see your value if they are looking through the eyes of their wound. Silence is not a tactic, it is a state of awareness. It is when you no longer need to win or be understood or have your worth confirmed. You become the observer. You watch them perform, persuade, swap into the victim role, and you smile, not from pride, but because you finally see the whole pattern. You realize they are not evil, they are trapped in their own darkness, and the only way not to be pulled in is to remain in your light. In Jung's language, silence is the expression of the self, the center of the soul where opposites meet. There, the super empath no longer swings between love and hate, anger and pity, victim and savior. They simply are. And in that being, the narcissist's power evaporates. Manipulation can only exist in an unawakened mind. Once you see the game ends. When the super empath steps into this state, their silence becomes a cold light, not loud, not dazzling, but piercing. The narcissist feels it, a vague, unnerving exposure by something beyond reason. They feel naked, small, with nowhere to hide. They may smear, lie, and defame to reassert a collapsing ego. But the super empath does not answer. They know every distortion eventually collapses under its own weight. There is a spiritual law the super empath knows well. You cannot be harmed by what you no longer identify with. When they cease to see themselves as a victim, attacks lose meaning. When they are no longer provoked, every trick fails. When they no longer need to be loved to feel worthy, they become free. And that is the narcissist's greatest fear, not losing you, but losing their power over you. In the end, silence is more than a tool. It is a right of liberation. In that silence, the super empath steps out of karmic emotional cycles, out of the roles of rescuer and the rescued. They become the observer, a witness to the collapse of illusion. In that moment, they touch the essence of inner freedom, where even darkness is no longer frightening, because it is simply the unloved part of oneself. When the super empath is silent, they no longer attempt to heal anyone. They simply live as proof that peace is real, and that peace, invisible yet immense, terrifies the narcissist more than any accusation, because it reveals a single truth. Their power was never real. It only existed as long as you believed. Between two people, one living by illusion and one by awareness, silence is the final boundary. One side unravels in panic, the other melts into peace. When the storm is over, only one thing remains: stillness. And in that stillness, the super empath has nothing left to say. Their silence has already said it all. 4. Part 4. Fear #2. Being seen and exposed. Nothing terrifies the narcissist more than being seen. Because for them, being seen does not mean being understood, it means being exposed. They don't fear light itself. They fear light that passes through them. They fear an eye deep enough to pierce the mask they've so carefully painted, beneath which lies nothing but emptiness. To them, image is life, and losing that image is death. But the super empath does not see with the eyes of the world. They don't look through judgment, comparison, or roles. They see through awareness. And in that seeing, there is no judgment, only truth. When the super empath looks at the narcissist, they do not see the powerful one, the charming one, or the poor victim. They see the wounded child, the child who was never loved for simply being themselves. They see the emptiness that the narcissist tries to fill with boasting, the fear of abandonment hidden under cold detachment, the hunger for validation behind cruelty. And with a single glance like that, the entire architecture of the false self begins to crack. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." Whatever is denied clings tighter to the psyche. The narcissist has spent a lifetime resisting their inner darkness, denying their fragility, their shame. They've built layers of defense, like a fortress of mirrors, where every gaze reflects back an illusion. But the super empath does not see with ordinary eyes. They see with perception. Their vision goes beyond reflection. It penetrates it and touches the substance beneath. And in that moment, every illusion collapses. To the narcissist, the super empath's gaze is an existential threat. It tears down the boundary between what is real and what is performed, between the persona they present and the self they reject. They feel stripped, exposed, cornered. They try to cover it up through attack by blaming, smearing, or playing the victim to regain control. But behind all that resistance lies the deepest fear, the fear of being seen for what they cannot face themselves. The truth is, narcissists are not afraid of you seeing their behavior. They fear you seeing their essence. They fear a gaze that's no longer hypnotized by appearances, but sees what lies beneath, the absence of love, the self-hatred, the buried shame. So when the super empath stands before them, calm, unshaken, unresentful, it drives them mad. There is nothing more terrifying for a soul unready to face itself than to be seen by another with total understanding. The super empath does not look to accuse, they look to understand. But in the psyche of the emotionally undeveloped, deep understanding feels like invasion. To the narcissist, awareness is threatening, because it strips away their ability to hide. They survive by controlling perception, and the empath's gaze dissolves that control. It's like sunlight piercing water, revealing what's beneath, leaving no place to hide. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow. When someone sees the parts of us we repress, the psyche reacts in one of three ways: denial, aggression, or avoidance. The narcissist typically chooses all three. They deny reality, that's not me. They attack the mirror, you're crazy, and they run to find new supply to restore their illusion. But what they don't realize is that the super empath's gaze, once it touches them, leaves a permanent imprint. They can walk away, but they cannot forget, because for the first time someone truly saw them. That is why so many narcissists return later in desperate hoovering cycles. They don't come back for love. They come back for that look, the one that saw them without judgment or hatred, only truth. What they don't understand is that this gaze exists only where sincerity remains. Once they choose deceit again, the mirror shatters, and all they see is their own distorted reflection. In reality, what wounds the narcissist most is not being exposed, but being seen and still loved, because they cannot comprehend how someone who knows everything about them could remain calm. It confuses them, for their mind only understands two poles: idealization or degradation. They cannot grasp unconditional love born from awareness instead of illusion. And it is this lack of understanding that keeps them lost. Meanwhile, the super empath comes to a profound realization. You cannot expose a narcissist with words, because every word will be twisted. The only way to reveal them is to stay rooted in your truth. When you don't play their game, don't react, don't explain, their true nature reveals itself. Like a dark room that needs no battle, you simply turn on the light and the darkness disappears on its own. However, to hold this light, the super empath must practice what Jung called detached confrontation, to see without becoming entangled. For if your gaze carries judgment, it becomes war. If it carries fear, it becomes weakness. Only when the gaze arises from still awareness does it carry the power to transform. The narcissist fears being seen, yet deep in their soul they long for it. They want someone to see them without hatred, to witness them without leaving. But because they lack the courage to see themselves, they destroy everyone capable of seeing them. That is their greatest tragedy. They seek love, yet annihilate those who could give it. The super empath sees this and understands that sometimes compassion means letting go. Not everyone is ready to face truth. Some souls must wander longer through darkness before they crave the light. So instead of trying to awaken the narcissist, the super empath withdraws their energy and keeps their light for themselves. That light one day may serve as a distant signal, a reminder that there is still a way home. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When the super empath returns to their true self, they no longer need anyone's gaze to confirm their worth. They become the one who sees, not the one who needs to be seen. And in that role, they become a mirror for all who dare to face themselves. As for the narcissist, if ever they awaken, it will be in the moment they remember that gaze. The gaze that once saw them, did not condemn them, and quietly invited them back to their humanity. They may deny it, resist it, but deep down they know that truth was planted within, and sooner or later it will take root. Because nothing is more powerful than the gaze of awareness. It does not accuse, control, or persuade, it simply illuminates. And in that illumination, all that is false dissolves, and all that is real is born. That is the deepest reason the narcissist fears the super empath, not because they are strong, but because they are real, not because they judge, but because they see, and not because they seek to expose, but because their very presence makes the truth reveal itself. 5, Part 5, 4, Raute 3, Being Forgotten. There is no death a narcissist fears more than death by forgetting. For them, being forgotten is not merely losing a person, it is losing themselves. They exist through the gaze of others, and when no one looks, they vanish. Attention is the oxygen that feeds their ego, the tether that keeps them bound to reality. When the super empath turns away, goes quiet, and steps out of that universe of illusion, what they leave behind is not a gap in a schedule, but an existential void. The narcissist does not know how to live in silence, cannot fathom existing without being seen. From childhood, they learn that being noticed equals being loved, and being ignored equals being worthless. Every later behavior, boasting, manipulation, blame springs from that hunger, the hunger to be acknowledged. Carl Jung once said, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism. For the narcissist, the drug is attention, and when the super empath withdraws it, they plunge into the most brutal withdrawal of all, oblivion. At first, they deny. They make noise, send signals, post ambiguous messages, stage new dramas to pull your eyes back. They change profile photos, drop nostalgic breadcrumbs, or attach your name to half-true stories, all to test whether you're still watching. Because for them, being hated is better than being forgotten. Hatred still carries energy, forgetting carries none. When you don't react, when their name no longer appears in your mind, when you stop mentioning them even in unconscious conversation, that is when the real collapse begins. The super empath need do nothing. Their very absence is the narcissist's nightmare. Empathic silence and forgetting are a declaration. You no longer have power in my world, and that makes them tremble. They cannot grasp how someone who once loved them, cried for them, forgave them again and again, can suddenly be serene as if they never existed. They do not see that in that silence, the super empath has undergone a rebirth. In depth psychology, forgetting is not mere loss of memory. It is a rite of energetic release. When you truly forget, you have reclaimed all energy once bound to the other. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections, taking back the unconscious projections we placed on someone else. You stop seeing them as savior, stop treating them as the source of your pain, stop letting them define what love is. In that reclamation, your energy returns to center where it belongs. For the narcissist, that act is devastation. They are no longer the center of the story, no longer the protagonist of your life. And because they have no inner content, they don't know who they are without someone to define them. Their world becomes an empty stage after the audience has left. The lights are still on, but no one is watching. The last echoes fade, and silence begins to corrode their awareness inch by inch. Some narcissists will fight the forgetting with desperation. They find someone new, a fresh supply to revive the show. They love fast, boast loudly, manufacture the illusion of happiness, hoping the image of "I'm doing great" will lure your gaze back. But it is only an unconscious attempt to flee the truth. No one is truly looking anymore. What they fear most is not you being happy with someone else, but you being happy without them. The super empath understands that forgetting is not erasing memory. It is dissolving the energetic bond. They do not hate, retaliate, or cling. They simply release, and that release is the highest form of freedom. When you truly forget, you are no longer defined by the old story. You are no longer the one who was hurt, but the one who passed through hurt to return to yourself. The narcissist, meanwhile, cannot forget. They are obsessed with the past. What are you doing? Do you still remember me? Do you still think about me? They live in frozen time where they remain the center of a play that ended long ago. What pains them most is realizing you are no longer acting in it. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." The narcissist will do anything to avoid the emptiness within. But the super empath's forgetting leaves them no escape. Without reactions to grip, without attention to manipulate, they are forced to look inward, something they have never been ready to do. Meanwhile, the super empath begins to see the beauty of forgetting. They realize that forgetting is not loss, but transformation. When a memory no longer hurts, it no longer binds. When a name no longer makes you tremble, it becomes a lesson. When a person no longer angers you, they become a teacher without ever knowing it. That is when memory turns into wisdom. The narcissist fears being forgotten because they never learned to leave a mark by truth. They can make an impression, but not a connection. They leave traces in people's minds through drama, not depth. And everything built on illusion fades with time. The super empath, by contrast, does not need to be remembered because they leave energy, not imagery. They pass through lives like wind, yet leave a quiet change like water. In Jungian terms, this is the transference of energy from persona to self. The super empath no longer needs the roles of the understanding one, the healer, the sacrificer. They become a free being, one who knows how to love without owning, how to let go without hating. In that state, they surpass not only the narcissist, but their own need to be remembered. In spiritual maturity, being remembered or forgotten no longer matters. Light does not need witnesses to exist. It only needs to be lit. The super empath understands this and continues to shine quietly. On lonely nights, the narcissist may reopen old messages, try to rekindle memories, watch from afar to see whether you mention them. And they discover the most frightening thing. You don't talk about them anymore. You don't even think of them. You have gone so far that their existence is only a blurred image, a faded dream. In that moment, they meet what they've fled all their life: anonymity. No gaze, no stage, no role, only themselves with themselves. For a soul never taught to self-reflect, that is hell. For the super empath, it is heaven, the restoration of all things, the return of energy to center, the end of seeking outside to realize everything was always within. For the empath, forgetting is not an ending, it is proof of healing. Only when you no longer need to hold on to something are you truly free of it. And that is what the narcissist will never understand. Sometimes the victory is not to be remembered forever, but to leave gently, leaving no trace in anyone's heart, because you know true light needs no mention. It only needs to be lived. 6. Part 6. 4. Raute wir. Your inner sovereignty. Nothing frightens the narcissist more than the moment they realize you no longer belong to them, not in body, not in mind, not in emotion. You are no longer angry, no longer sad, no longer seeking reasons to understand them. You have become a being they cannot touch. To them, that is the real death. The narcissist does not fear losing your love. They fear losing their influence over you. Love to them was never a gift, it was power, the measure of their sway. When you love them, they have energy. When you hate them, they still have energy. But when you are calm, they have nothing. Your calm is as if you have removed your soul from the chessboard. The game ends, and there is no opponent left. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. The narcissist cannot do this. They live cut off from their true nature, fleeing the shadow they fear." The super empath, after walking through the long night of the soul, manages the impossible. They accept themselves not only the good, but the wounded, angry, tender, fragile. And when they do, a psychological phenomenon occurs. There are no gaps left to exploit. A narcissist always seeks weaknesses to leverage: compassion, the need to be loved, fear of abandonment, guilt, the desire to be understood. But once the super empath has healed, the wounds once open become luminous scars, no longer painful, only reminding. You cannot be controlled by a wound you have brought into awareness. That is why the narcissist fears your inner sovereignty above all. This sovereignty is not loud. It is not the proclamation, "I need no one." It is the quiet knowing, "I am enough." When you no longer need anyone's validation, the power they held dissolves. When you no longer need to be loved to feel worthy, you become free. And freedom is what the narcissist cannot bear. Your freedom is a mirror reflecting their imprisonment. In Jungian psychology, this stage is individuation, the return to the center of being, where one no longer lives by the persona, social mask, but by the self, true center. After stepping out of the narcissist's game, the super empath begins to live along their own spiritual axis. They stop seeking meaning in others' eyes. They generate meaning from within. They no longer ask, "What do they think of me?" but "Who am I?" when no one is looking. In that question lies the answer the narcissist has avoided all their life. The super empath learns that true power is not controlling anyone, but needing to control no one. Peace is not making others change, but refusing to let their behavior fracture your stillness. Reaching that point, your energy changes. You are no longer easily dragged into chaos. You become the axis around which the storm turns. When the narcissist meets you in that state, they sense something beyond reason, an energy they both crave and fear. They crave it because they once glimpsed that light in you, the light they lack. They fear it because that light cannot be controlled. They know that coming closer will illuminate their shadow. Thus, they vacillate between wanting to possess you and wanting to destroy you. That is their tragedy. They love what they cannot hold and destroy what they cannot become. The super empath, meanwhile, no longer needs to win. They understand every soul learns at its own pace. They no longer resent the one who hurt them, knowing that person acted from the level of awareness they had. They do not need revenge to finish the story. They have the truth, and truth is enough. Inner sovereignty does not make the super empath cold. It makes them clear. They still feel but are not submerged. They still love but do not lose themselves. They can open their heart without losing their boundaries. It is that rare balance between heart and mind, between mercy and awareness, what Jung called the union of opposites. And it is this union the narcissist cannot comprehend. They only know extremes, love or hate, worship or annihilation. They cannot stand between two poles without falling into one. Your quiet presence confuses them because they cannot label you. They are used to sticking tags: victim, weakling, savior, cruel one. When you stop reacting along those lines, their system collapses. As the super empath becomes sovereign, they cease to be a character in the narcissist's tale. They become the storyteller. They rewrite the narrative in the language of awareness. There is no perpetrator, no victim, only souls reflecting one another to evolve. In that realization, they step out of the karmic loop, the loop of control, suffering, and manipulation. Inner sovereignty is knowing you can stay or leave, and in either choice, remain yourself. It is loving without owning, giving without needing return, saying no without guilt. It is looking into the eyes that once hurt you and saying, not with words but with energy, I understand, and I no longer need this. Out. The narcissist dreads that moment, for they know they have lost you forever, not because you hate them, but because you have outgrown them. You no longer inhabit the frequency where their game exists. They may try to summon you in memory, retell the story in ways they can bear, but it no longer reaches you. You need no vindication, no understanding, no victory in debate because you have left the board. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When the super empath brings their inner darkness into awareness, fate no longer puppeteers their life. They stop attracting unawakened souls to repeat the same lesson. They become creators of their destiny, not through craving, but through consciousness. The narcissist sees this and trembles. They sense, unconsciously, that this is the deed they never dared, becoming real. In you they see what they lost: the courage to face the dark, the compassion to forgive oneself, and the quiet to live without an audience. Now the super empath no longer needs to prove strength. They simply live, breathe, create, love, and shine from within. They need not be remembered, for they have merged with the greater current of life. They need not be admired, for true light needs no recognition, only the freedom to be itself. And that is what throws the narcissist into panic. They realize true power is not making others dependent, but needing no one to be free. They realize you have found what they have run from all their life wholeness. And once you touch that wholeness, no one can manipulate you again, not with words, not with guilt, not with memories, not with the past. You have become what they fear most, a soul that cannot be possessed. 7. Part 7. The psychological death of the narcissist. The narcissist's death does not arrive with a loud explosion. It happens in silence, slow, merciless, and unseen. Not because someone kills them, but because they dissolve under the weight of the very illusion they built. When the super empath withdraws their energy completely, no more reactions, no more gaze, no more mirror for them to see themselves in the narcissist world begins to collapse from within. They do not die physically. They die psychologically. Carl Jung called this moment ego death. But for the narcissist, the ego is everything. They have nothing beyond it. So when the ego collapses, they no longer know who they are. They look in the mirror and see nothing. What once made them feel alive attention, praise, the emotions of others now echoes as an empty void. And in that void, a primal terror awakens, the fear of non-existence. This is the soul's ultimate penalty for living too long in illusion. When a person lives without a center, without the self, then the moment outer reflections vanish, they fall into the abyss of meaninglessness. Panic sets in. They try to make noise, reconnecting with old contacts, stirring drama, restaging the script. But this time no one reacts, no one believes, no one looks. And that drives them mad. The narcissist enters a cycle of collapse, a reversed ritual of rebirth. In the alchemy of the soul, the empath passes through Nigredo, the dark night, to be reborn into light. For the narcissist, Nigredo does not lead to light. It leads to decay. They do not know how to look into the dark to understand it. They only know how to fear it. And when the super empath's light is withdrawn, that darkness is no longer contained. It floods in and consumes their mind. At first, there is emptiness. No one seems to care. No messages, no listeners, no watching eyes. They try to fill it with work, new relationships, artificial busyness. Nothing reaches the inner core. The harder they run, the louder the hollow echo of their soul becomes. Then comes panic. They seek attention by any means. Attacks, slander, defamation, feigned remorse, even begging. They do not truly want you back. They only want to be seen. They need a witness to their existence. But the super empath now lives at another level of awareness while no longer hypnotized by emotional theatrics. They see clearly, this is not love. This is an addict writhing for the old dose. When every attempt to draw attention fails, despair follows. Their ego cannot endure the truth that they have no influence. Self-destruction begins, seeking alcohol, sex, work, anything to help them forget. But everything tastes dull, meaningless. What once made them feel alive is now an empty reflex. No one is there to reflect them, and in the shattered mirror of awareness, they see only a stranger's face. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. The narcissist does exactly that, clinging to every form of illusion to avoid looking at their own soul. But the more they run, the more they are hunted by what they fear, the truth that they are not powerful, not special, not an eternal victim. They are simply a child who was never taught to love themselves." This collapse is unseen, unrecorded, unknown. They can still laugh, still post pictures, still tell glittering stories, while inside everything lies in ruins. Without any gaze to reflect the illusion they crave, the mind begins to fragment. Some sink into depression, some into addiction, some chase new supply to self-rescue. Wherever they go, they carry the same thing, their own shadow. Meanwhile, the super empath does not look back with hatred. They know the collapse is not revenge, but rebalancing. In the psyche's universe, every inflated energy must diffuse and return to center. The narcissist's death is not punishment. It is the consequence of unreality. Whatever is not rooted in truth will, over time, fall apart. There is rarely a moment, if the narcissist is lucid enough, that Jung called a moment of potential redemption. A brief touch with the real self, a felt recognition of pain, an admission that all of it was a self-made illusion to avoid being hurt. If they can hold that moment, true healing can begin. Most cannot bear such nakedness. They return to the stage, rebuild the play, seek a new audience. The cycle restarts. This time, however, something is different. They no longer have the super empath to reflect light. Their roles grow dim. The new people don't fully believe. The old ones no longer care. The world around them stops reacting. Slowly, They disappear not because anyone erased them, but because nothing real remains to sustain them. In Jungian terms, this is the mortification of the persona, the death of the mask. When the mask falls, the soul meets the disowned parts of itself. For the awakened, this is the beginning of resurrection. For the fugitive, it is the beginning of dissolution. The narcissist chooses the latter. To be reborn, they would have to surrender something their ego will not do. At this point, the super empath no longer wishes to witness. They understand each soul must walk through its own darkness. They keep their distance without hatred. They do not need karma to settle scores. They trust the psyche's homeostasis. Every manipulation, lie, and wound finds its way back to its source. They smile not in glee, but in peace, for they have learned this law. Darkness is not destroyed, it is dissolved when seen. The super empath has seen, accepted, and completed their lesson. And the narcissist, if one day they dare to look into the inner emptiness, will understand that no one killed them but themselves, and no one can save them but themselves. In that silence, the two souls diverge like opposite poles of a journey. One sinks deeper into illusion. The other steps out of illusion and returns to essence. While one continues to hunt for new supply to sustain a false life, the other finds true life, the kind that needs no admiration, no gaze, only the freedom to be. When the super empath looks back, they see they never won, because this was never a war. They simply passed through the storm and realized they never belonged there. Peace, they discover, is not a prize, but an original nature, merely veiled by illusion and fear. Returning to their center, they see that the narcissist's death is not a tragedy, but a mirror proving the value of truth. In truth, all that is false dissolves. In light, darkness fades by itself. In peace, counterfeit power loses meaning. This is the psychological death of the narcissist, a bloodless, soundless collapse that echoes forever within their soul as a warning. No one can run forever from their own shadow. The narcissist's disintegration does not happen in a moment. It unfolds with every breath. Outwardly, they still smile, still post confident quotes, still tell stories of success. Inwardly, a part of them dies each day. Every striving turns meaningless because no one is watching. Every compliment rings hollow because even they don't believe it. They once thought their worth lived in others' eyes, but when all eyes turn away, they find they have nothing left to hold. Now the unconscious surges like a flood. Repressed childhood memories, a father's scolding, a mother's cold stare, the sensation of abandonment all return. They see the inner child, trembling, alone, crying to be held. Instead of holding it, they recoil. They hate it. They call it weak, the source of shame. In that rejection, they lose their one chance at rescue, the chance to touch their true humanity. This is the moment Jung called the confrontation with the self, the final face-off between the false ego and the true soul. For the narcissist, it is not a dialogue but a war. Their ego will do anything to survive. Blame others, retell the old story with themselves as victim, add new masks, even borrow spiritual language to gild the illusion. They may talk of healing, energy, and awakening, but deep down they are still fleeing the same thing, the shadow. If the super empath happens to glimpse this from afar, they understand something profound. You cannot save another by facing themselves on their behalf. Light cannot illuminate where someone insists on preserving darkness. They must open their own eyes. That is why the super empath's silence is the supreme gift. It leaves the other alone with themselves, with no exit. Some narcissists, when collapse arrives, flee to the opposite extreme. They don the costume of the humble, the spiritual, or the victim of circumstance. Without confronting the root of fear, each transformation is just a new persona, now plated with subtler language. Jung called this spiritual bypassing, using spirituality to avoid the shadow instead of integrating it. They may speak of light, but their voice trembles because they never stood in darkness long enough for true light to appear. And when those masks also fall, they enter the final space, silence without illusion. A few can endure it and realize this is not death, but the chance to be reborn. Most cannot. They clutch at anything, a new relationship, a new scapegoat, an old memory. Their world becomes a maze with no exit, every corridor leading back to the same door, the door of truth they are not ready to open. If they dare to open it, they will meet what they have fled all their life, the abandoned child, lonely and longing for love. If they embrace it, the real healing begins. If they turn away, the loop restarts. They will seek another mirror, restage the play, try to recreate the lost energy, but with each performance the light grows dimmer. They will live, but without vitality. They will exist, but no longer be. Meanwhile, the super empath no longer stands inside the story. They have left the labyrinth, climbed the hill, and look back. From there they see the whole landscape, the narcissist's endless cycles, the loops of manipulation and harm, the weary souls unconsciously finding each other to reflect their own shadow. They understand this is not a private tragedy, but a collective phenomenon. In Jung's language, modern society is a vast system of collective narcissism, a culture that worships image, achievement, and validation. Each individual narcissist is a small emblem of a collective ailment. Empaths and super empaths are nature's counterforce, souls sent to serve as mirrors, to shatter the collective illusion through awareness, through silence, through seeing, through love that does not depend. Recognizing this role, they no longer feel anger. They glimpse the hidden order of the psyche. Every shadow exists to spark light's awakening. Even the narcissist belongs to this arc, not as enemy, but as an unwitting teacher, forcing the empath to love without dependency and stand firm in themselves. When the lesson ends, the empath carries not resentment, but wisdom. Thus, in the final stage of narcissistic death, only one soul survives the true soul. All layers of illusion, masks, and inflated identities fade away. Jung called this the reconciliation with the shadow. For those who cannot face it, reconciliation becomes dissolution. The narcissist's death is not biological ending, but the disintegration of consciousness. The ego collapses before the soul is born. In silence, the super empath walks on without looking back, without hatred. They know everyone must one day face their own shadow, and when that day comes, the narcissist will remember the light you once brought, not as a lover, not as a victim, but as a mirror that once reflected truth. And then, perhaps at night, perhaps in panic, perhaps in a dream, the narcissist will recall that gaze, your gaze, a gaze that did not judge, did not beg, did not resent, a gaze that said only, I see you. Perhaps in that moment, a single tear will fall, the first true tear, not for manipulation or pity, but because their soul has just recognized itself. That may be the beginning of redemption, or not. For the super empath, it no longer matters. You have finished your role in this journey. You have become the light they feared most, the light of awareness. Finally, when every mask has fallen and every psychological battle has grown quiet, only light remains. Not the blazing light of victory, but a still deep radiance rising from within, what Jung called lumen naturae, the natural light of the soul. This is the light the narcissist fears most. Not because it burns, but because it reveals. This light needs no proof, no audience, no approval. It simply is, and its very presence dissolves illusion. Illusion survives only in the shadow of ignorance. When light enters, it vanishes on its own. The super empath has become that light, no longer defined by the past, no longer labeled victim, no longer needing to save anyone. They no longer fight the dark, they have integrated it. They no longer fear their own weakness. They have turned it into a gateway to strength. They no longer need to be loved to feel worthy. They are love. In the soul's quiet, they understand that everything that happened, hurt, betrayal, manipulation, tears, was a ritual of destruction and rebirth. The narcissist arrived not to ruin them, but to awaken them. For only when light is thrown into darkness does it know it is light. And only when love is betrayed does it learn how deep it runs. Carl Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." After light is not born from dreaming of light, it is born from daring to face the dark. The super empath has done this. They did not run, hide, or deny. They sat through the soul's long night and faced the part that once needed to rescue others to feel meaningful. And they realized no one needs to be saved, only to be seen. Now they see everything, the darkness in others, the light in themselves. And they smile, a quiet smile, without pride or bitterness, only understanding. For they know that in the spiritual universe, no one truly wins and no one truly loses. Some souls are waking, some are still asleep. Some know themselves as light. Others try to live in the reflection of someone else's. But true light does not compete. It does not prove. It does not demand recognition. It simply shines for no purpose at all. And that is you, the awakened super empath. You shine not to be seen, but to light your own way. To the narcissist, this light is the most terrifying thing of all. In its glow, they cannot perform, they cannot hide, cannot control. They must face what they have always denied, truth. And truth is always a consuming fire to the ego. To the soul, however, truth is liberation. In the universe's silence, perhaps one day, after all illusions have dissolved, they too will remember this light, the light that once frightened them, yet is the only light that could save them. For the truth is, no one is ever truly forgotten on the soul's journey. Every meeting, no matter how painful, is an arrangement that brings us closer to ourselves. The super empath does not need to close the story, because the story was never truly open. They need only to keep walking, to live truthfully, to be present, to be whole. With each step they take, the world around them grows a little brighter, not because they try, but because they are. And so the wheel completes its turn. The narcissist slowly melts into their own darkness, while the super empath dissolves into their own light. One keeps seeking recognition in a noisy world, the other finds peace in absolute stillness. One keeps running from the self, the other returns to essence. One lives to be looked at, the other lives to see. In that strange symmetry, the universe comes to balance. Darkness is no longer the enemy of light, only the place where light has not yet been known. And the super empath's journey is no longer a victim's tale, but the path of a light bearer. If you are hearing this, perhaps you are one of them, once misunderstood, once manipulated, once thinking yourself weak, when in truth you were simply learning to remember who you are. You were not born to be anyone's lifebuoy. You were born to be a lighthouse. And the light that shines from the still center of the soul cannot be extinguished. So keep walking. No need to speak, no need to prove. Let your peace be the reply, your truth the message, and your light the answer to all that once hurt you. Because in the end, what the narcissist fears most is not your leaving, not your silence, not your forgetting. They fear that you have become yourself. And in that moment, you have not merely defeated them, you have surpassed them and the former version of yourself. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you have done just that.